She laughed when I lost my job, calling me a failure who wasn't built for success. While she planned her escape with another man, I quietly held the key to a $67 million fortune. When she discovered the truth months after our divorce, her desperate attempt to reclaim what was never hers would cost her everything, including her dignity. My name is Alan Morrison, and I used to believe in fairy tales, the kind where love conquers all and marriage vows actually mean something. That naive belief nearly destroyed me, but it also inadvertently made me one of the wealthiest men in Silicon Valley. 8 years ago, at a cramped apartment gathering that smelled of takeout pizza and cheap wine, I met Sandra Chin. She was magnetic in that effortless way some people possess, the kind of woman who could make you forget your own name with just a smile. We talked until dawn about everything and nothing. Her dreams of travel, my passion for coding, the books we'd both read 3 times over. "You're different," she said that night, her fingers tracing patterns on my forearm. "Most tech guys are all logic, no soul. But you actually listen." I was 26, fresh out of Stanford with a computer science degree and a job offer from Technova Solutions that felt like winning the lottery. Sandra was 24, working as a marketing coordinator and dreaming of bigger things. We fit together like pieces of a puzzle I didn't know was incomplete. Our courtship was a whirlwind of coffee shop dates that turned into all-night conversations, weekend trips to Napa Valley, and the kind of romance that makes your friends simultaneously jealous and nauseous. When I proposed 18 months later, on the same rooftop where we'd had our first kiss, she cried happy tears that I believed were genuine. "Yes," she whispered, throwing her arms around my neck. "1,000 times yes. We're going to have the most amazing life together, Alan." The wedding was perfect, an elegant affair in Half Moon Bay with 200 of our closest friends and family. Sandra looked radiant in her custom Vera Wang gown, and I felt like the luckiest man alive. During our first dance to At Last by Etta James, she whispered in my ear, "Thank you for choosing me. I promise I'll never let you down." The first 5 years of our marriage were everything I'd dreamed of. My salary at Technova had grown to $180,000 annually, plus substantial bonuses that allowed us to live comfortably in our 4-bedroom house in Palo Alto. Sandra quit her job after our second anniversary. "Why should I stress about deadlines when my brilliant husband can take care of everything?" And threw herself into being the perfect wife. She decorated our home with an eye for detail that impressed all our friends, hosted dinner parties that became legendary in our social circle, and seemed genuinely happy playing the role of supportive spouse. We vacationed in Tuscany, spent long weekends in Big Sur, and talked endlessly about our future children and the legacy we'd build together. But underneath the surface of our picture-perfect life, something was shifting. I began to notice how Sandra's eyes would light up when she talked about our neighbor's new Tesla, or how she'd go quiet when her friends discussed their husbands' promotions. Still, I attributed it to normal human nature. Everyone wants nice things, right? The crack in our foundation appeared gradually, then all at once. 6 years into our marriage, the first warning signs appeared at Technova. Our quarterly meetings, once filled with celebration and aggressive growth projections, became exercises in damage control. The software industry was shifting, and Technova, once innovative and nimble, was struggling to keep pace with younger, hungrier competitors. Marcus Webb, our CEO, called an all-hands meeting on a gray Tuesday in March. The conference room that had once buzzed with excitement now felt like a funeral parlor. "I won't sugarcoat this," Marcus said, his usually confident demeanor replaced by the weight of difficult decisions. "We're facing headwinds that require immediate action. Effective immediately, all performance bonuses are suspended indefinitely." The room erupted in concerned murmurs, but Marcus wasn't finished. "However," he continued, raising his voice over the noise, "for those of you with patents developed during your tenure here, we're prepared to transfer full ownership back to you in the event of an acquisition. This includes the right to negotiate independent sales." My heart skipped. I had one patent, a revolutionary data compression algorithm I'd developed mostly during evenings and weekends, driven by pure intellectual curiosity. The patent, filed under my name but assigned to Technova per company policy, represented 2 years of obsessive work. I'd always known it was valuable, but in the current market, it could be worth millions to the right buyer. That evening, I drove home through the familiar streets of Palo Alto, rehearsing how I'd break the news to Sandra. The manicured lawns and luxury cars and driveways that had once represented aspiration now felt like pressure, a standard of living we might not be able to maintain. Sandra was in the kitchen, arranging fresh orchids she'd bought that afternoon. She looked beautiful in her casual elegance. Yoga pants that cost more than some people's rent, a cashmere sweater that complemented her dark hair perfectly. "You're home early," she said without looking up. "Good day." I took a breath. "Actually, we need to talk about some changes at work." She finally turned, and I saw her expression shift from mild interest to focused attention. "They're suspending bonuses temporarily," I said carefully. "The market's been rough, and the company needs to make some adjustments." Sandra set down the orchid stem with deliberate precision. "For how long?" "They didn't say." "But Sandra, it's not catastrophic. My salary is still solid, and there's potential for—" "Potential?" Her voice carried a sharp edge I'd rarely heard before. "Alan, we have a mortgage. We have commitments. My friends will notice if we suddenly start economizing." That word, economizing, hung in the air like an insult. "It's temporary," I said, reaching for her hand. She pulled it away. "That's what they always say." Sandra walked to the window, staring out at our neighbor's new BMW. Janet's husband just got promoted to VP at his firm. They're looking at houses in Atherton now. The comparison stung, though I tried not to show it. "I'm working on something," I said. "Something that could change everything. But I need you to trust me." She turned back to me, and for a moment, I saw something cold in her eyes that I'd never noticed before. "Trust you," she laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Alan, I gave up my career to trust you. I built my entire life around your success. Now you're telling me to trust you through failure." That night, Sandra slept in the guest room for the first time in our marriage. It wouldn't be the last. The next 18 months were a masterclass in watching someone you love transform into a stranger. Sandra's mask didn't slip all at once. It eroded gradually, like paint peeling from a wall. The first sign was the shopping. Despite our reduced income, Sandra's spending accelerated. New handbags appeared weekly, each more expensive than the last. When I gently suggested we should watch our budget, she laughed bitterly. "What budget?" "The budget where I pretend everything's fine while you play engineer at a sinking company." "The company isn't sinking," I protested. "And even if it were, I have options. The patent I mentioned." "Oh, please." Sandra rolled her eyes. "Your magical patent. Alan, you're a software engineer, not Steve Jobs. Stop living in a fantasy." Her cruelty was surgical in its precision. She knew exactly where to cut deepest. The late nights started in October. Sandra would leave after dinner, claiming to meet friends for drinks, and wouldn't return until after midnight. When I'd express concern, she'd flip it back on me. "Maybe if you were more interesting to be around, I wouldn't need to find companionship elsewhere," she said one night, not even bothering to remove her coat before heading upstairs. "Companionship?" I followed her. "Sandra, what's going on? We used to talk about everything." She paused at the top of the stairs, her hand on the banister, and looked down at me with something approaching pity. "We used to talk about your dreams, Alan. Your plans. Your future success. Now all we talk about is why you can't deliver on any of it." The overnight stays began in December. The first time Sandra didn't come home, I called her cell phone 17 times. She finally answered at 6 a.m., her voice thick with sleep and annoyance. "I crashed at Rebecca's place," she said. "We had too much wine, and I didn't want to drive." But Rebecca lived 10 minutes away. And Sandra had never been too concerned about a glass or two of wine before. "Next time, just call," I said. I was worried. Worried. Her tone shifted to something approaching disgust. "Alan, I'm a grown woman. I don't need permission to live my life just because yours is falling apart." Each conversation became a battlefield, each gesture a small act of war. Sandra began speaking to me the way you'd address a disappointing employee, with barely contained frustration and zero respect. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday in February when Technova's board announced the company was being acquired by Global Tech Industries for $2.1 billion. For most of my colleagues, it meant uncertain futures and probable layoffs. For me, it meant opportunity. That evening, I sat Sandra down in our living room. She was scrolling through Instagram, barely acknowledging my presence. "The acquisition went through," I said. "I'm being let go, but Sandra, this is actually—" She looked up from her phone, and I saw something I'd never seen before, satisfaction. "Finally," she said, setting her phone aside. "Finally, the universe is correcting itself." "What do you mean?" Sandra stood up, smoothing down her dress with theatrical precision. "I mean, Alan, that I always knew this day would come. You're just not built for success. Some men are winners. Others, she gestured vaguely at me. Others are you. The words hit like a physical blow. But then she continued, and I realized she'd been saving the worst for last. I've been thinking about this for months. About us. About what I really want from life. She walked to the window, her back to me. I deserve better than this. Better than a husband who can't even keep a job at a second-tier tech company. Sandra. No. She turned back to face me, and her expression was resolute. I'm done. I'm filing for divorce. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The room spun. You've what? Janet's husband recommended someone excellent. We've been discussing the best approach for maximizing my settlement. I stared at her, this woman I'd loved for 8 years, and realized I was looking at a complete stranger. Maximizing your settlement, I repeated slowly. Oh, don't look so shocked, Alan. You had to know this was coming. I mean, really, did you think I'd waste my 30s being married to someone with no ambition? That night, after Sandra had gone to bed in the guest room naturally, I sat in my home office and made a decision that would change everything. I opened my laptop and began researching corporate attorneys who specialized in intellectual property sales. What Sandra didn't know, what she had never bothered to learn, was that my worthless patent was about to become the most valuable asset either of us had ever imagined. The divorce proceedings began in March, and Sandra approached them with the enthusiasm of someone planning their dream vacation. She'd hired Patricia Hawthorne, one of the most aggressive family attorneys in the Bay Area, known for securing massive settlements for wronged wives. I, meanwhile, had hired David Chin, no relation to Sandra, ironically, a quiet but brilliant attorney who specialized in protecting assets during high-stakes divorces. She wants everything, David told me during our first meeting. The house, both cars, alimony calculated at your current salary level, and half of all savings and retirement accounts. Give it to her, I said. David paused, his pen hovering over his legal pad. Excuse me? Give her everything she's asking for. But I have 2 conditions. I explained my situation, the patent, the potential sale, and the delicate timing involved. David's eyes widened as I outlined the scope of what we were dealing with. Alan, if this patent is worth what you think it is, you could be walking away from tens of millions of dollars. Only if I make a mistake, I replied. Which is why I need you to structure this divorce settlement very carefully. My first condition was simple. I wanted all alimony payments calculated and paid up front in a lump sum from my severance package. This would eliminate any future financial entanglements between Sandra and me. My second condition was more complex. A comprehensive waiver clause stating that both parties relinquished all rights to make future claims against any assets or income not explicitly disclosed during the divorce proceedings. She'll never sign that, David warned. She will if she thinks she's getting everything anyway. The negotiation took 3 months. Sandra and Patricia fought hard for every detail, squeezing out additional concessions wherever possible. Sandra got the house, worth $2.1 million, both cars, a combined value of $140,000, and a lump sum alimony payment of $380,000 from my severance. The only moment of resistance came from Patricia herself when she reviewed the final settlement. Mrs. Morrison, she said during our last mediation session, I strongly advise against signing this waiver clause. It's unusually broad, and if your ex-husband comes into any significant money in the future. Sandra cut her off with a wave of her hand. Patricia, look at him. Does he look like someone who's about to strike it rich? She gestured toward me with barely concealed disdain. I was indeed not much to look at in that moment. I'd lost 15 pounds during the stress of the divorce and hadn't been sleeping well. My cheap off-the-rack suit, purchased specifically to look as unsuccessful as possible, completed the picture of a man down on his luck. Besides, Sandra continued, I want this finished quickly. I have other priorities now. I later learned that Sandra's other priority was a 34-year-old investment banker named Marcus Steele, whom she'd been seeing since December. Marcus drove a Maserati, owned a penthouse in Soma, and had already proposed to Sandra, contingent, of course, on her divorce being finalized. The papers were signed on June 15th, a Tuesday that felt like the end of one life and the beginning of another. Sandra walked out of the law office with a settlement check for $520,000, alimony plus half our savings, the deed to our house, and titles to both vehicles. Well, Alan, she said in the parking lot, her voice lighter than I'd heard it in months, I guess this is goodbye. She was wearing a new dress, something expensive and celebratory, and her engagement ring from Marcus caught the afternoon sunlight. "I hope you figure out how to land on your feet," she added, though her tone suggested she doubted my ability to do so. I watched her drive away in what had been our BMW, and I felt nothing. No sadness, no anger, no regret. Just a profound sense of relief and anticipation for what came next. What came next was a phone call that changed my life forever. 2 weeks after my divorce was finalized, I received a call from Jennifer Walsh, the head of IP acquisition at Global Tech Industries. "Mr. Morrison, I hope you have a few minutes. We've been reviewing the patents transferred from Technova, and your data compression algorithm has caught our attention." I had been waiting for this call, but hearing it still sent adrenaline coursing through my system. "I'm listening," I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "We'd like to make an offer for exclusive ownership. Our tech team believes your algorithm could be revolutionary for our cloud storage division." The initial offer was $43 million. I negotiated for 6 weeks, and the final sale price was $67.8 million, paid to a limited liability company I'd established called Meridian Innovations, LLC. On David Chen's advice, Meridian was owned by a trust domiciled in the Cook Islands, with me as the sole beneficiary. The structure was completely legal but virtually invisible to anyone who might come looking for assets in my personal name. The day the money transferred, I sat in my modest apartment in Mountain View. I'd moved there after Sandra took the house, and stared at a bank statement that showed a balance of $67,847,332.18. I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't purchase exotic cars or take luxury vacations. Instead, I quietly began building something meaningful, a venture capital fund focused on supporting innovative startups that traditional investors overlooked. For 18 months, I lived simply and worked purposefully. I drew no salary from Meridian, instead living off my remaining severance money and doing occasional consulting work. To anyone watching, I looked like exactly what Sandra had predicted, a failed tech worker struggling to rebuild his career. Then Sandra discovered the truth. The call came on a Tuesday evening in November, exactly 18 months after our divorce was finalized. I was reviewing potential investments when my phone rang, displaying a number I hadn't seen in over a year. "Hello, Sandra. You son of a bitch." Her voice was shaking with rage. "You absolute son of a bitch. I take it you've heard some news." "Heard?" She was screaming now. "I hired a private investigator, Alan. I know about Meridian. I know about the patent sale. $67 million. I had wondered when this moment would come. Sandra's new husband Marcus had apparently made some poor investment decisions, and their lifestyle had begun outpacing even his substantial income. According to my own discreet inquiries, they'd already burned through most of Sandra's divorce settlement on a lavish wedding, a house in Atherton that stretched their budget, and Marcus's gambling problem that he'd successfully hidden from Sandra until after their marriage. "Congratulations on figuring it out," I said calmly. "Though I'm curious how you afforded a private investigator if you're as strapped for cash as I'm hearing." "Don't you dare try to turn this around," Sandra snarled. "You hid $67 million from me during our divorce. That's fraud, Alan. I'm going to take you for every penny." "Actually, Sandra, you're not." The confidence in my voice seemed to catch her off guard. "The patent sale occurred 4 months after our divorce was finalized," I continued. "It wasn't marital property because we weren't married when it happened. The patent itself was developed by me, personally, using my own time and expertise. You contributed nothing to its creation. And most importantly, you signed a comprehensive waiver agreeing never to pursue future claims against my income or assets." "Silence. Your own lawyer warned you against signing that waiver," I added. "But you were so eager to cash out and move on to your upgrade that you ignored her advice." "You manipulated me," Sandra said, but her voice had lost its edge. "I gave you exactly what you asked for," I replied. "You wanted out of our marriage because you thought you could do better. Well, you got out. How's that working out for you?" She hung up. 3 days later, I received notice that Sandra had filed a motion to reopen our divorce case, claiming fraud and seeking her rightful share of the patent sale proceeds. It was time for the final act of this drama. The hearing was scheduled for January 12th in Santa Clara County Superior Court. Sandra arrived with Patricia Hawthorne and a box of documents they believed would prove their case. I arrived with David Chun and a thin folder containing everything we needed to destroy their argument. Judge Michael Harrison had been on the family court bench for 15 years and had seen every conceivable divorce-related scheme. He listened with professional patience as Patricia outlined Sandra's case, then turned to David. "Mr. Chun, your response?" David stood, opened our folder, and began methodically dismantling Sandra's claims. "Your Honor, the timeline is simple and incontrovertible. The divorce was finalized on June 15th. The patent sale occurred on October 23rd, 4 months and 8 days later. The patent was Mr. Morrison's intellectual property, developed independently over a 2-year period before the couple's marriage began deteriorating. Mrs. Steele contributed nothing to its creation and was, by her own admission during the divorce proceedings, eager to sever all financial ties with my client." David handed the judge copies of the patent filing, the sale agreement, and the divorce settlement. "Furthermore, Your Honor, Mrs. Steele specifically signed a waiver clause, against her own attorney's advice, I might add, relinquishing all rights to future claims against Mr. Morrison's assets or income." Judge Harrison reviewed the documents for several minutes while the courtroom remained silent. Finally, he looked up. "Mrs. Steele, did you sign this waiver voluntarily?" Sandra, who had been growing paler by the minute, nodded reluctantly. "And Mrs. Hawthorne, you advised your client against signing this clause?" "I did, Your Honor." But Mrs. Steele was insistent. "Then I fail to see the basis for this claim." Judge Harrison set the papers aside. "The patent sale occurred after the divorce was finalized, using intellectual property that predates the marital problems and required no contribution from Mrs. Steele. The waiver clause is clear and comprehensive. Motion denied." "But I wasn't finished." "Your Honor," David said, "we'd like to file a counterclaim for breach of contract and legal harassment." For the next hour, David outlined how Sandra's frivolous lawsuit violated the terms of our settlement agreement and had caused me significant financial and emotional distress. "We're seeking reimbursement for legal fees and damages in the amount of $127,000. Judge Harrison didn't need long to consider. Counterclaim granted. "Mrs. Steele, you are hereby ordered to pay Mr. Morrison's legal fees and damages within 30 days. As we left the courthouse, Sandra tried one last desperate play. "Alan, wait." She caught up to me in the parking lot, her eyes red with tears. "Please, can we just talk? I made mistakes. I know I did. But we had something real once." I looked at this woman who had once been the center of my universe, who had shared my dreams and my bed, who had promised to love me in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. "Sandra, you didn't make mistakes," I said gently. "You made choices. You chose to mock my dreams, to abandon our marriage when things got difficult, and to pursue a man you thought could give you a better lifestyle. Those weren't mistakes, they were calculated decisions." "But I love you," she whispered. "I know I didn't show it well, but I always loved you." "No," I replied. "You loved what I could provide for you. When you thought that was nothing, you left. Now that you know it's everything, you want back in. That's not love, Sandra. That's opportunism." I walked away and never looked back. Today, 3 years after that final confrontation, I run a successful venture capital firm that has helped launch 17 startups, created over 3,000 jobs, and generated returns that have allowed me to give away more than $20 million to various charities. I married Dr. Emma Rodriguez 2 years ago, a brilliant biomedical researcher who knew nothing about my wealth when we met at a coffee shop near Stanford. She fell in love with a man who drove a 10-year-old Honda and lived in a modest apartment, never suspecting that same man could afford to buy the entire block. Sandra's marriage to Marcus lasted 8 months. His gambling debts and her spending habits created a perfect storm of financial destruction. Last I heard, she was working as a marketing consultant and living in a studio apartment in San Jose. I occasionally get asked if I ever feel guilty about the way things turned out. The answer is simple. You cannot feel guilty for protecting yourself from someone who viewed your downfall as their opportunity. Sandra taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. True character reveals itself not in moments of triumph, but in moments of crisis. When our marriage faced its first real test, she chose to abandon ship rather than help navigate the storm. When she discovered my success, she chose to attack rather than accept responsibility for her own choices. Some might call what I did revenge. I call it justice. Sandra got exactly what she asked for, a clean break from a man she considered beneath her. The fact that she later discovered that man was worth $67 million isn't my problem to solve. The best revenge, they say, is living well. But I've learned something even more powerful. The best revenge is not needing revenge at all. I sleep peacefully knowing that every choice I made was legal, ethical, and fair. I cannot say the same for everyone involved in this story. In the end, Sandra was right about one thing. Some men are built for success and others aren't. She just got confused about which category I belonged to.